Hey everyone, and welcome to Reading Crossbow. My name is Lena, and I'm here with my co-host Rob.
Hey, Lena, and hello, everyone else. And we're excited to have you back as we are here to read my book this month, Gunmetal Gods. And it's been a pretty interesting month with the two very metal themed fantasy books. Did this one live up to the Brandon Sanderson?
Not quite, but that is excellent segue into letting our viewers know that if you are new here, we pick two books a month, and this is Rob's pick, of course. And I had just gone through my pick on the last few episodes, which is Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn. And what we do is we each give a halfway review of each other's books, and then we meet together the next week and go over our thoughts for like a full review with no spoilers. So that's what we're doing today. So if you missed my halfway review, you can check that out last week, and I gave some thoughts about Zamil's book, and I ended it thinking, oh no, this is not the book for me. So I'm not going to give anything away yet, but I'll let you pull it out of me.
Okay. And we actually really wanted to point out that big thanks for everyone, all the new subscribers and all the viewers, especially over the last few episodes. They've done just terrific. So we're very excited to have some new people watching the show.
Yes, a lot more subscribers. Thank you so much. And also join our Discord. We'll mention that a few times, usually throughout the show. We would love to have you part of our community. But Rob, what have you got for me on Gunmetal Gods?
All right, so this is Gunmetal Gods by Zamil Akhtar, and this is a dark fantasy story. I initially thought this was going to be more of a cosmic horror, but dark fantasy is still definitely up my wheelhouse. So to give you an idea of what this book is like, you have two warrior characters, and these are our main point of view characters, and each one of them is on a separate army for a separate nation, and these two nations are going to collide. As the characters basically interact with each other, and they kind of circle each other throughout this story, as well as start to interact with the more fantastical elements of this world, including jinn and spirits and the titular Gunmetal Gods.
So the Gunmetal Gods was what I was expecting a bit more of. And when we got to the Gunmetal Gods, which I know you're going to cover, they weren't what I was expecting. But the gunmetal, like the title, comes into play with the gods, which for some reason I wasn't also expecting either. When I think of like gods, I think more ethereal for some reason, which I know I haven't read cosmic horror, so I guess a lot of that was a big surprise for me, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, and I was hoping for a lot more of the cosmic horror, but I think this book more sets that up for future stories. But there is a lot of elements that are common to like cosmic horror or Lovecraftian horror that do appear within this book, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
And with this Lovecraftian horror, cosmic horror, we should probably point out, and I said this in my halfway, that I think this is actually our highest trigger warning count book now. I'm not sure, but I think it beats Poppy Wars, only because of incest, which is a whole other element in this book. But real quick, you can check out my halfway for more detail. But a couple trigger warnings: violence, of course, religion, if that's something that bothers you, like maybe going too far in some areas, violence against children, attempted rape, and incest. So actually quite the list for, a 460, 70-page book, somewhere in there. But that's a lot.
All of that sounds just like Game of Thrones, so it should be pretty fun.
Fun.
All right, then. Well, I always like to ask if there was another media property that you might compare this to kind of give someone an idea of what reading this book is like. Is there something that maybe comes to mind, maybe a book or a movie?
Yeah, so you usually ask me this question, and I'm not always prepared. So I thought about it this time, and I was like, what if Rob asks me that? Interesting you said Game of Thrones, because, yes, definitely along the lines of Game of Thrones. But I actually think because of some of the fight scenes in this book and a lot more of the blood, I actually think, like, Game of Thrones meets, like, the 300 or Spartacus or some sort of flavor like that, because we don't get crossbows really in this book, but we get a lot of spears and we get a lot of that. So that type of fighting, spears on horses, blood, it's Yeah, it's the 300 quite a bit.
Yeah. For me, it really kind of reminded me of the movie Kingdom of Heaven, which was a story about the Christian Crusades and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. So it is kind of like, because the cultures within this story are reminiscent, but also just the way this is told, where the more pious or religious someone seems to be, they can self justify some pretty awful behavior using that religion, even when it doesn't even, it seems like it's self defeating. And this is on both sides of this story, where the two sides, everyone's kind of terrible, which I love in a book.
I I keep waiting to love a book that you love for that reason, because you've talked about lots of books on this show where some characters are unredeemable but they're fun to follow anyway, like along their adventure. So I can safely say after my halfway that this wasn't that for me. So but I'm here. You're going to recommend a book one day where I'm going to find one of these unredeemable kind of characters you're talking about and be like, "Yes, I get it. I get this genre."
Okay.
But it wasn't with this book.
Oh. Well, I guess is to kind of let's talk about that a little bit. Was there any specific plot or aspects of this book that you found to be particularly frustrating or upsetting?
Uh, I felt like, well, first of all, I feel like Zamil's a pretty good author, actually. Like clever, very clever author. And with that comes a lot of ideas. And this was, I think, actually very clearly thought out. There's a lot he wanted to put in this book. And I actually think it was too much. So it's more of an overall answer for me, because I think there was parts of this book that were just badass, cool. The gin were like one of my favorite things, but like this story bringing it all together, I think wasn't done very eloquently. So that's where I got kind of like frustrated at times, because there was really great setups for the plot. Really interesting and intriguing characters, especially with fallen angels, or like the sort of enchantress woman that comes along. I won't go into that too much because I don't want to spoil it. I really wanted her to have more to do with the plot. And she did, don't get me wrong, she did. But a lot of pieces just weren't wrapped up well. And this could be partially because of independent publishing. I'm not sure. Lack of editors. I have no idea what type of reading groups this went through. But there was just a lot. It kept making me crazy. That was like, well, what about this? What about that?
Okay. So for me, the one thing, and I've mentioned this in a previous show, the one thing that I found kind of be frustrating in this book is that I think something like maybe 85-90% of this book is told from the point of view of just one of two characters. And there's this spot for maybe a couple chapters where suddenly it just shifts to new point of view characters just for a bit, and then it shifts back. And that late in the book, I was like, why are you changing the point of view characters now? I get it. I get it within the way it's framed in the story, but it was like we could have just stayed with our current point of view characters and then got them recapped as what happened when they weren't around. I think I think that was the one part I kind of didn't like, but as far as I found it to be a bit jarring. But overall, I mean, I really did enjoy this book as I was reading it. So let's kind of get into that. The characters. Did you have a particular maybe favorite character, or maybe the one you identified with?
Well, we have Micah and Keva, and these are the two protagonists that you talk about. And no, I didn't resonate with either of them. I actually likened Keva to the uncle in Napoleon Dynamite that's like reminiscing over his high school football career. So I mentioned that just slightly, but like he can't ever seem to get himself together. And it's many, 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 many chapters. And actually, there's an interesting tidbit that is part of his lore, because he's basically this incredible warrior who does this incredible deed. Actually, it says it on the back cover, so I can say that, like, killed a mage, basically. We find out later how that happened might not be how it's presented. So just interesting. So I feel like he gets lucky sometimes too, and like so, it just that one made me crazy. Micah was more interesting to me, even though he was more unredeemable and awful. Just really awful, awful character, I think. But I actually looked forward to his chapters because at least they were meaty and I knew a lot would happen and I would be like shocked. So, yeah, definitely look forward to those chapters more. But there's a secondary character and her name is Sadie. And to me, I could have had a whole book on Sadie. This is YA for me, actually. There was a YA section in this book. I don't know if you know that. It's actually one of the last. It's a POV character. You talked about that earlier. The switching. It's one of the characters that has a POV switch. Except this one makes sense because it's almost more of an epilogue. She's drawing some conclusions. Yeah. So this character's super badass, and when we know I like my badass female characters, and actually she kind of reminds me of a sort of Bronze and Ashes a bit. The heroine in that story, although she's not a goddess in this story, spoiler alert, she's not a gunmetal god, but she's incredible, an amazing warrior princess, and I just think that that's so cool. But I grew up with Xena in the 90s, so why wouldn't I love, like, we didn't get crossbows, like I said, but like a bow shooting, spear throwing, horse riding warrior princess. And every scene she was in, I was there for it. Yeah, so her.
Yeah, I think for the most part I agree with what you've said. I found Micah the Metal, his chapters were hands down like always something kind of crazy and wild was going to happen. Those were kind of my favorite chapters in general. Keva, I don't know. I might identify a bit more with Keva just because he's getting old. I'm feeling it.
You threw the winning touchdown pass in high school?
No.
No, okay. I get the feeling older part though. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, I get you, Keva. I don't want to go fight either.
Yeah, no, he also is where we really get to experience a lot of the magic of this world. And so his chapters had a different kind of interesting to them, especially as the book progressed, where we kind of got to explore the supernatural part of this world. So I guess speaking of that, let's talk about the magic. Like, this had a very different kind of magic than we've covered on this show. So tell me about it and what you thought.
So there was kind of a lot of different forms of magic, but most of this is magic from the gods. And we call that divine magic on the show. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's magic that has been either taken from the gods, gifted from the gods, given to the land. At one point, some soldiers are washed in what they call angel blood, but it's like a thick river, kind of interesting, and they can be sort of like born anew. So most of the power comes from gods, and some of the magic could come from gods too, but is not like fully answered because there's magical creatures and they're jinn, and I think some other types of creatures. We don't fully get into it in book one, but there's some crazy creatures in here, like even like a chicken boy. So some major surprises. It's like a chicken on the bottom, with like boy face on top. So odd. And he's like a type of jinn. So like definitely different types here. We have the story of the gods and their magic and how they impact the earth and how they affect the people of the world. And there's some angels and fallen angels, and these have power from the gods. I guess we can call that magic. Almost in a sorcerer kind of way for a few of the characters. And then there's definitely mages. And the mages are interesting because they get, from what I can tell, we haven't fully gone into the mage story that's set up for book 2. They get their power, I think, maybe you have some insight into this, get their power from the jinn. And this appears to be more elemental magic, and different mages can control more types. So there's like a mage character in here that can control the winds. We find out Chicken Boy is kind of a wind character later, so who knows if that was connected? I'm not sure. There's a fire mage, so they're drawing that elemental magic from these jinn. I don't know if the jinn got their magic from the gods, so it's actually somewhat complicated. I think it's going to be more complicated as this series progresses on. But for this series, or this book, I felt like it was a bit not well fleshed out, but intriguing.
Yeah. And I found the core magic system throughout this book reminded me a lot of Michael Moorcock in the Elric of Melniboné books, because in those books, Elric is kind of well known as he's the like world's greatest sorcerer. But if you actually read the books, he doesn't really cast spells. In fact, most often he's summoning a creature and making a deal, or leveraging a deal that's been made some point in the past. And that's the way these jinn work. Like if a mage in this setting, if they want to fly, they call like an air jinn who just grabs them and picks them up. To everyone else who can't see the jinn, it looks like he's flying.
I
But
thought that was so crazy.
but he's just being carried around like a baby. It's
Yeah.
or like one of them can control like fire, and so it looks like he's shooting fire, like causing like fireballs to explode, and really he's just like, hey buddy, can you toast them? And the jinn is blasting people.
Yeah.
But to an outsider, you think the mage is the one that's actually doing all the work, when really he's just the conduit, to the supernatural world.
I haven't experienced this type of magic before, so I love, for like the sake of our podcast and our listeners, that you have, because for me I was like, I'm trying to picture this and I'm like, is the mage not doing anything? And I should say that, I mean, no one else can see the jinn though, only the mage can. So that's in itself somewhat of a power. I don't
Yes.
know that that's magic. I'd almost put it as a power in a way. But I was confused by that. I'm like, but you get it. And
Yeah.
so I was like, is this like smoke and mirrors, like the Wizard of Oz, pay no attention to the guy behind the curtain kind of stuff? Because I'm like, they're seriously just like using these creatures that no one can see, but they look badass. Is that cheating?
No, no. I mean, it follows a classic kind of trope of basically borrowing power from other people, other spiritual beings, and so it fits within several different other magic systems. It's not as common. I think we're used to getting like either traditional like spells, or the superpower like magic, but this is definitely a trope that I think has been around for a long time.
Huh. This makes me wonder, and I know it's not answered in this book, but maybe you can tell me for this type of magic trope. When this happens, I have to think of like the deities, or the jinn, or fairies, or whomever is helping them. Like, what's their reason? Do they live to serve? Do they want to? And I'm imagining there's some sort of complex issue with them and their gods where it benefits them to help the humans. But like, until we get there, I can't know. But I'm just like, it's weird. I'm trying.
Yeah, and it definitely feels like there is going to be more of a deal making element or something like that. We just don't get to see it within this book, but it's highly implied that we're going to get a lot more of that in book two, as one of the characters basically learns how to do magic. So speaking of the magic, there's something kind of related, and I think it has to do with the theme of this book, or one of the themes of this book, and that is corruption. So, but that was one of the core themes that I saw. Was there any other themes that you kind of felt as you read this book?
Takes me back to grade school with reading Animal Farm and the whole my teacher driving into me, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Like, I kept feeling that, like, same with you when I read this. But then also on a more relatable kind of human, feeling is like, how far are you beyond redemption? And redemption's a huge, like, arc. I don't know if that's right for this book, where, and it's even brought up, like, sometimes in like a inner monologue with the characters themselves, like, oh, if I do this, am I still a good man? If I kill 1,000 people, but I say I'm sorry afterwards, is it okay? And then when other people are like speaking out loud and talking about the two main characters in this book, and they're like, is he beyond redemption? There's one side quest sort of character in this book that we don't really know what's going on with him, but he's very intriguing, and I'm hoping that he makes an appearance in book two, but for you to read. But anyway, we'll get to that. But so I just, how bad is too bad? Are you ever to a point where you're unforgivable? And depending on which religion you believe in or don't, we've all kind of heard different religions say there's a place for you somewhere. There's a place for you in heaven or whatever you believe in, but you as long as you repent or ask for forgiveness, and that kind of comes up a lot. But the characters definitely are like, wait, have I gone too far?
Yeah. So and the corruption in this book, and this is something that actually you do see a lot, like within Lovecraftian horror, is that the corruption manifests physically. So as these characters become more and more corrupt, it starts altering their forms. Even you can other people are able to recognize, be like, something's not quite right with you. Or, and this was not just one character, but several different characters where you could actually perceive that there was something messed up about them in their soul. Because it was manifesting into the real world. This deep corruption, and as the characters get further and further down their path, that manifesting of the corruption becomes more and more obvious, until maybe you have a redemption type element, and even that physical changes start to back off a bit. And I found that to be a really interesting theme within this book.
At least there was a lot to explore. And it's challenging for readers who want to like dive into that sort of like dichotomy, good, bad, without the characters themselves being so clearly labeled as good or bad, because neither of them really are.
Yeah, and I think that helped kind of pull me into the story, as far as these characters' journeys were getting more and more twisted. It was like, well, it really kind of made me excited to see what's going to happen next, or how messed up of a logic are they going to go. But that kept me going. Did you find anything about the author's writing style to be easy or difficult to read? Did it help draw you in, or just push you away because it was too dark?
It was definitely accessible. It's written in a more like modern way. There's not like difficult words to read. This is not written in like old text type format. Super modern, super easy to read, clear, concise, easy to follow. I feel like anyone could pick this book up and easily be able to read it, follow along, understand. Whether or not you feel through the writing connected to these characters, I don't know that was successful, but maybe it was, because again, this is a book style I don't really read. I didn't feel connected to the characters at all. We often talk about like, do we care if a character dies? Do we care if something bad happens to them? And in terms of the main characters, I did not. But I think that that's intended as well. So that can be difficult for someone like me to read.
Yeah, and it does make sense. I don't think these characters were supposed to be people you really like, be like picturing yourself inside, or having a power fantasy of, oh, I wish I was them, because you clearly are made to feel like that you shouldn't like these guys. Micah does all these terrible things in the name of a religion that he really doesn't seem to care about. And Keva, on the other hand, is so grief ridden throughout his whole story that he struggles to get past that. And even when he gets, some ability to change his lot in life, he, against the advice of everyone he cares about, he's like, no, I got a blood vendetta, and we're going to mess some people up. That's all I care about. And everyone else is like, hey, maybe back off. And he's like, no, you guys do that. I'm out for blood. he's on a revenge mission. And it's a, I don't think you're supposed to like these characters, but you're supposed to at least understand them. And I think that did come across. So I guess it's time to kind of rate the parts of this book and, really trying to find out how you felt about this book. So let's just talk about the setting itself. Did you find the setting to be unique and interesting, or is it really just a mishmash of existing stuff?
The setting felt like I could have picked it up and pulled it out of really any fantasy book. So it wasn't anything like new for me necessarily. There was parts of it that are cool, but as far as like the lay of the land, so to speak, where this takes place, two kingdoms, two armies really trying to battle for this one pivotal city that, if controlled by a kingdom, it makes a huge difference, right? It's important to both sides. And I just feel like I've read about that a lot before. So like the basics of where this story takes place is just kind of like, eh. But the parts where my brain were like, what's going on here, was the parts actually not mentioned very much at all. We only get them a few times, but may come up in future books, which is like this idea, and it almost sounds trippy, like it happens in a trippy way when they're kind of getting to these places. I'm trying to not spoiler it, but like a god shows them basically where their home is. And I don't know that they're taken or it happens in their minds, but it's like this really kind of trippy place, different galaxies almost, and it's really like what you say, like cosmic horror. My brain had a hard time actually even like picturing it. So that was interesting to me in terms of a setting. And then there was another section, which is like this sort of maze or labyrinth of caves sort of below the ground where it's almost like a prison where they send like bad people to. Interestingly enough, that's come up in two books I've read recently, where a mountain kind of houses the crazy. Actually came up in the Poppy Wars as well. So again, not a new theme there. But what I liked about it was it almost appeared, because there's demons in there too. They didn't say this, I'm extrapolating here, but could almost be some sort of gateway to hell. I don't know, maybe it's not, I could be wrong, but like those two very different, like above and below kind of places in the setting were really interesting. But this just didn't happen very often. This is not where the story takes place. Interesting though.
Yeah, and I felt the cosmology of this setting, and as you noted, it's not deeply delved into yet in this series. I found that to be probably the most interesting part. When they, so we mentioned Lovecraftian horror. Like there's a part, and we'll try to avoid spoilers, but basically they're like, the god is like, let's go off to this dead star a galaxy away, and that's where the gods really are. And they zoom there, and they're like, and there's this sleeping god, and that's kind of the most important one. It really kind of seemed like Azathoth from the Cthulhu mythos. So there's a lot of elements there with this like cosmic, pantheon of these gods, like what they're calling angels and fallen angels, which are very not what you expect. And then, as you noted, there's a whole underworld that seems almost like the Underdark in the Forgotten Realms and in D&D, where there's this magical labyrinth of tunnels underneath the ground where you can go down in one area and pop up in a different part of the world. And that's a really neat, element. And and I think you were right. The book, I think, explicitly kind of says, if you keep going down that labyrinth, you're going to find some monsters down there. The whole point of that labyrinth was to trick the monsters so they couldn't come out. They'll get lost in the labyrinth. So that's what keeps the demons from getting out into the real world, is this labyrinth that was made. And I found that to be really interesting. We just didn't get enough of it. So if you were to give the setting a rating, though, what would you give it?
I'm going to have to give it a 2, just because it was primarily in like a normal kind of setting. It was well developed, and not every story we read has to be this, whoa, the setting blew my mind, but it was just kind of average. And I personally didn't understand yet at least the reach for the cosmic stuff. I feel like this could be a higher ranking for me if my brain didn't go like crazy, drugged out, trippy land when I was trying to understand how they were seeing this like god layer. I still don't get it.
Yeah. And so I would go with a 3 as well, or similar rating. I felt that, you know, there's some interesting ideas, but we just didn't get enough of it. And so let's talk about the characters. Did you feel that these were very well rounded or very interesting characters that had interesting character arcs, or did they just feel very shallow and flat?
Oof, that's tough because like I feel like I'm gonna be harsh here, really harsh, because I don't read this kind of book, and half the book is Keva and half the book is Micah. Keva was boring to me, boring, boring, boring. So for like hundreds of pages, I'm like, meh, meh, get off your ass, Keva. Stop being sad, as you said. Like, get your shit together. You're a warrior. He made me hate reading his chapters, and I think he's supposed to be the one that like you kind of want to silently root for. He's more redeemable than the other one. And that's marginal at best. But and then we get Micah. It's the most interesting chapters. And I just wasn't rooting for him at all. I just wanted him to die. Like, please die, Micah. You're awful. And by the way, when we talk about these trigger warnings, they're Micah chapters. It's always Micah chapters. And it's like bad. And it wasn't even done in a way where I like the bad guy is a baddie and he's cool. It was like the bad guy is irritating to me and yucky. So I hated it. And that was the majority of the book. It's these two characters. And I'm just like, so I'm trying to get through it. And what's crazy with the characters I like the most were all secondary characters. Characters we didn't get to see very much. One character's really cool, kind of plays this sort of like back and forth guy, like in between the two armies, and he's a big question mark. I'm not giving away anything here. Giant question mark on this person. Loved that character. I got him like twice. It's a 1 or a 2. I don't know. Two. I'm gonna be nice and say 2.
Okay. So I would agree. I think actually the secondary characters are probably the ones you're more rooting for. But I generally agree with everything you said about Micah and Keva. Keva's chapters were not my favorite, and Micah's were far more interesting for the majority of the book. And you know, he wasn't quite like a Mark Lawrence where you're like, oh no, he's an awful person, but you're kind of rooting for him to win. No, that's not this character at all. You're kind of like, oh no, what horrible thing is he going to do now? You know, so I found his chapters to be entertaining, even if you're not necessarily, you know, rooting for his success. So I'm also going to go with the 3 on this one.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I don't know if this is the right time to bring this up. We don't usually do this too much in these episodes, but I kind of feel like I get the type of character you're talking about because I got a little glimpse of this type of character in the book that wouldn't burn, where there's this character who's like kind of mean, actually like dragging children behind him at one point, but like kind of endearing too. You're like, you're just mean because you're messed up from a war. Like you actually mean well, kind of, but you're abrupt and rough and difficult to work with. So like I could have had a whole book of that character in that book. And so when we get into these types of characters, I kind of am rooting for that. So this was just, you know, different. And my sensitive little soul is needing to learn how to adjust to, I don't know, these dynamic sort of angry people.
All right, so let's talk about the supernatural parts of this story, the actual magic, how did you feel this was executed? You know, is it a unique, interesting system for you, or, you know, just run of the mill?
So divine magic is my least favorite. Just always my least favorite. So if I had to rate that part of it on this book, it's a 1 for me because it didn't go anywhere. But it had a redeeming factor. It was saved by the mage and the djinn, and that was cool. And the fact that these djinn can actually mate with humans at some point. And that's how we get these weird type of like chicken boy characters, which is super funky and fun. Like I wanted so much more of that. If you have books that you recommend or anyone and wants to put them in our comments, I'm happy to take a look at them because like I want to delve into that type of funky character. This reminds me of like when I read my fairy books like Akatar and stuff, like Selkie and other cool things and just like fun. I love mermaids. I love weird creature stuff. So that's up there for me. So that boosted that stuff is like a 3 or more. So probably melds at like a 2. I didn't get enough of the stuff I loved, and the stuff I didn't love could have been cool. Divine magic can be cool. Like how we got in the familiar. I kind of liked that. But this wasn't explained enough for me. We just did not get enough of the gods.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I feel like the magic in this was, it just wasn't, there wasn't enough of it within this book to really give it a high rating. I found what we got to be very interesting and, thought provoking. There just wasn't enough of it within the context of this story. And I think it's just the way the story progressed. And it does get a little even more interesting towards the end as you start getting the more powerful creatures or characters within this setting starting to interact with our main characters. I found that to be really interesting, but once again, it was just a little too late. And so we don't get enough of that to really give this a high rating. So for me, I'm going to actually go with a 2 on this one. It's not what I was looking for. I was hoping for more. All right, so we mentioned ease of reading earlier. How would you rate the actual prose, the writing style of this book?
I'm going to give high marks here. It's probably the only area I am. Spoiler alert, I didn't love this, but Zamil's talented. I can't take that away from him just because I didn't love the book. So I feel like this author has a story to tell. It's clear, and I read a bit about him. He wanted to pull in some of his culture and some Middle Eastern references, and that was well done. I got a good idea for where we were, what was going on. I even liked some of like the hookah references. Like we talk about like one of the characters like just gotta be a little bit lazy and stuff, but he like wants to sit down with his little hookah and smoke some cherry wood. Like just I don't know. I thought the author did a good job setting up that stuff. Easy to read if you've not read this type of book and you're fine with the trigger warnings. This author I think it does a good job of doing what he does. I would like to read something from this author that wasn't cosmic horror. I might like it more because I didn't dislike the author. So I guess that makes me give the author a 4 because I'm actually decently impressed with the writing style.
So I definitely agree with what you said. I found this book to be easy to pick up. I found even the scenes that were the most horror kind of dark, they were very evocative and you were able to really picture these things very well, even if maybe you didn't want to, because they were very dark scenes, but it came through the book very well. So I'm going to say the writing style is also a 4. I absolutely agree. So before we get into our final part of the reviews, let's just talk about the story itself. Did you find this story, like the way this progressed, to be very interesting, or did you find this to be the meh part of the story?
So there's parts of the story that I liked. I'm going to lead with that. There's a bit of a love story here. Actually, love's a big undertone too. They're doing what they do that's bad because they loved someone and they're angry, or they love their gods. But so I loved kind of the developing love story between two characters that I think was well done. I was looking for that side of the story. Big surprise. But I couldn't get behind what the two main characters were fighting for. I understand the political side of where and I know we're going to get into the map, but where this city's located and why they're trying to take it. It's like a city that hasn't been taken for 300 years. You know, if they control it, then they have the holy city. It's very important to both sides. So, like, I get all that, but I just couldn't get behind Micah's reason for fighting and doing the things he did. And to me, that part of the story was broken because like I couldn't see fighting for the angel. Like it didn't seem enough for me because I never thought or felt he believed in the angel. But it's clear he did because he, especially towards, you know, different parts of the story where he really feels torn by his choices and he wants to appease his God. But like his actions just don't match it. So I had a disconnect there, especially with Micah. And then I had a disconnect with Keva just kind of because there wasn't enough of his story there. It just, I mean, the mage thing was kind of cool. His fighting was kind of cool, his story. But, like, I could never, like, get on board with why, okay, they were constantly hating and at war with each other. Yes, there's things that happen in the book that cause it. Someone in the chat's going to be like, oh, well, of course, because, you know, Micah did this to Keva. And I'll be like, yeah, I know. But, like, I had a hard time seeing why the next chapter came from that action. And then when another bad thing happened, the next chapters that came because of that action, that domino effect never dominoed for me. Like, seemed like the setup for that didn't work. So my story, and this is probably just me. This book has been reviewed a lot, actually, and some big YouTubers have covered this and loved this book. The story for me didn't work. 2.
And see, this I think this is where we're definitely going to diverge a lot because I think this is where I felt the book was at its best. I think it was an incredibly ambitious story. It covers so much as far as the genre and the way these characters work in this world, like the way. Like it kind of becomes clear that some of the corruption. I talked about the corruption, how it manifests almost physically, and like it's clear that like one of these characters was very corrupted in the past before this book even started, and that's impacting them throughout this book, and it's getting worse. And I felt like this was the best part of that book was the actual story arc, the way things are kind of tied together. How everyone is kind of interlinked throughout this world requires a lot of setup and planning. Some of those twists I found to be very fun and interesting. So I'm going to actually say this is a 5. This is the best part of this book.
Wow. Not surprised, Rob, but kind of wow. Okay. It makes me nervous about the more books you're going to give me.
But unlike your last book, which was one of your old favorites, this is a blind choice for me. I've never read this book or this author before, and I was just being like, well, I'm looking for something with a theme. And while it actually wasn't on that theme, it still hit a lot of the marks I really like in a book.
So that's like a win for you. And I know that feeling of like when you're like, sometimes we pick a book by the cover, it's cool. Or sometimes we're just like looking or like I'll Google like, I want a spicy book, but not too spicy and no fairies. But like, you know, and then I'm like, oh, I'll pick this one. So like, I'm happy for you that succeeded. For me, I'm like, I'm not strong enough yet. So like the callus that you get from like working hard or like that you develop over time, I don't have. So this is all like a flesh wound. Like, and it hurts.
All right. So before we get into the final review, we'd like to go over the maps. This is a book that has a map, and it's always exciting for us to actually review these maps. So we're going to bring up the map here and talk about it. All right, so we got our maps up, and how do you feel about this map? How would you rate this map?
So, much like the book is independently published, which I'm not putting that down. I mean, who knows? Like, I've thought about writing a book someday. I'll probably have to independent publish. There's nothing wrong with that. It's actually really cool. But the map feels like it was, like, done in, like, a make your own map.com editor or something, or like if Canva had like a make your map section. And I don't know, I just wanted it to be better. It's not horrible, it's we have all the necessary parts, and they're there. I have some questions. I'll reserve them for now. But like the map itself looks very much like copy paste a tree a million times, right? And it looks like you said that like RPG. Like this is like I don't know. It's very simple.
Yeah, to me, this map very much looks like a second edition D&D map. The way these mountains are drawn, the way the forests are kind of set, set up like with these little tiny trees that are very repetitive. I found the map to be, like I said, it's kind of reminds me of my childhood. However, I did find the map to be, it felt too small for this world. Like you really get this impression of these giant empires that are clashing, and there's an island that they use as a staging post, and everything just feels so small. And I think it's just because I don't really get a scale from this. It's hard to really understand the scale here. There's also nothing that really explains there's this kind of lock system or seawall system around the main city, that is described in the book, and it's a challenging description. Kind of reminds me again of Elric. In his home city, there's this kind of seawall system set up to make it almost a labyrinth to get in. Whereas this, I think, is just a couple layers. I think this is maybe inspired by maybe Constantinople, but it was hard to picture, and I actually think I would have benefited, considering how much of this book takes place in a single city, maybe getting a city map as well. That would have been great.
Yeah, I love when we get city maps. That would have been a huge benefit here, because I just like I said, it's Costany. If anybody has read this book before, that's the city we're referring to, where much of this happens. And like you were saying, there's actually a very important part in this book that's not really spoilery. It's just more like situational, political, like more like just navigation, where they have to actually change the holes of their boats to be able to navigate this sort of strait to get to Costany. And I see a strait on here, sort of, but it does not look unnavigatable. Like, for the effort and the chapters wasted and the bloodshed wasted on this happening to get this fleet of boats in there, I don't see it. And I don't often have to refer to a map, but I did refer to this map in that moment. I pulled up the pages and I was like, oh, what are they talking about? Like, they have to totally redo their boats to invade this city? And then when you look at the map, you're like, that looks like you can, it's actually a straight line. Like, you can sail right into it. And they didn't say it's because it's too shallow or something. Like, I would get that if it was like the shallows, but like it wasn't that. It was that like it was too difficult to navigate through it. I just don't see it on the map, and that really bugged me, because I'm like, it's not there. But as far as the other parts, I looked again when there was this river that's kind of like uncrossable. It's during the major fight scene, and the river plays a huge part in like this kind of battle scene. And it's where I thought it was going to be, so that worked out. So all the necessary pieces are there. They're just kind of like, if you had to get your project turned in on time for school, you had to make your map, and you did it like the night before, and you get your list of like things that you need to have done, you did them. Hey, teacher, I did it. Ha! C-.
Wow, brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I said, I felt like this map didn't strengthen my perception of this world. I really wish, like I said, it felt like places are not, it's not clear, like these characters travel around feels like it should have either taken way longer or should have been much shorter, because like some of these distances traveled, it's like they did that on horse, might have felt like a few days, but like the distances of sailing are just as long. and it's like it feels off. Like there's something feels off about this map, and it's hard to really put my thumb on without spoilers.
Is it weird that I don't like the font too? What was actually kind of cool about this book, just from a creative perspective, is the font on the front for Gunmetal Gods with this kind of like Alpha Omega sort of symbol here. I forget which one it is, or it looks like anyway. This font I would think would actually look really cool on the map, and instead I think this is like a one of the basic kind of I say old worldsy a lot, but I can't think of a better word that you can find in like the font section. So it didn't match for me, and it didn't even match the font on the back of the book. And the reason that stands out for me is when I was making the thumbnails for my last episode, the halfway, some YouTuber had found this font or had like pulled it. I don't know how they did it, but it looked so cool, and I tried to recreate it and I couldn't do it. So my brain was like kind of stuck on how cool this was done. The cover's really cool. So I kind of wanted some of those elements that would have matched the map more. And that's tiny. That does not affect my rating at all. But I like when things are pulled together nicely.
Yeah. So how would you rate this map?
I mean, it served its purposes of where all the places were, right? That's a big thing. Did I use it? Yes, I did. I just don't like it. So it's a personal taste thing. So as far as usability, it's a 3. As far as style, it's a 1. So probably 2.
Okay. So I'm also going to just go with 2. I didn't enjoy this map as much as I would have wanted to. I think it was not as useful as I wanted, nor as artistic as I wanted. So
yeah, and dark fantasy, like epic fantasy, things like that. Like we're to the point where like we're craving maps, and people are saying that they like that about our show. Like we talk about the maps. Maps should be in every fantasy book. Like give us maps, authors. If they ever watch this, which cross fingers, who knows? Give us maps, please. Good ones.
Please, maps are great. But it's time to actually review the book as a whole, so we'll bring up our S tier. So you can see how we've rated books in the past. We're not always in sync. So how do you feel about this book in relation? Like, where would you place this on your S tier?
Oh boy, you're not gonna like me. Remember how mad I was at you that you gave Priory of the Orange Tree a 1? I still can't understand that. Like, I have no idea how that happened. Well, I didn't like this book, Rob. I didn't like this book at all. Sometimes when we talk about, like, well, a big thing for me is, did I have fun? Like, for example, like we read Face the Night. I don't think that was like a amazing book by any means necessarily, but I sure had a heck of a lot of fun reading it. I can handle a lot of like issues with a book. I can handle the violence. I can handle the awful killing that happened in here, all that stuff. If I liked the story and had fun, and I didn't at all. Would I recommend this to a friend? No, probably not. Like, I don't know any serial killers either, so I can't recommend them some light reading in jail, prison, whatever. It's a tough sell for me. This is a 1, Rob. It's a 1.
Yeah. Well, and you're wrong, and that's okay.
Oh, of course you think so.
I guess could I start throwing around heretic again? It does fit with the theme of this book.
I mean, I feel justified this time. Like with the Warhammer one, I feel like there's another good book out there. What are there? Hundreds of them.
Yeah.
There's gonna be another good one. Like, and then the universe is cool. It's badass. Like, and plus the models are neat. Like, I don't know. I could be. There's more there. This is all I have. You can't call me heretic on this
No.
one. There's one piece of evidence.
Yeah, and that's I'm joking, but no, I
know.
I felt like this book, like I mentioned earlier in the story review, is that I felt it was very ambitious. It did bring in a lot of elements to a book that you don't even really see commonly in this kind of book, like when they go to the Dark Star, at least maybe spiritually, or see what's happened in the past, the way the magic system works, and there's actually several different magic systems. We really didn't delve into it very much because the book doesn't delve into it very much. It's left to be mysterious, which, if you're going with cosmic horror, that very much is the case. It's supposed to be mysterious and unexplained. You have these weird cultists, which are genre where specific, where you're like, why would anyone worship this god or want to follow this deity? And they're like, no, no, I'm following him because I really do just want to watch the whole world burn. Like, I hate everything about this world, and that's why I'm following the chaos, crazy god, because the world needs to be punished. That's how, like, some of these characters come across, and I felt like, yeah, fuck yeah, that's what I want in a book. I want Micah the Metal to just ruin everything and hate himself while he's doing it, but kind of, he's like, but he might enjoy it while it's happening. I felt that was fun.
But I want to be good.
I want to be good while I'm doing these awful things. So yeah, no, I really did enjoy this book. I really want to see where this is going from here because the next two books are already published, and I want to see what happens when Keva actually starts to learn how to do magic, like, and we learn more about the different jinn. There's even some, like, almost prophetic things about what's going to happen in the future of these books that is revealed in this story, and it's like, I want to see where this is going. I'm excited to see where this is going, and I think that's what makes it a 4 for me, is I'm excited to see where this is going.
Wow. 4 seems a bit of a stretch, Rob. Wow. Okay. Well, you know what? If I have to concede on anything, I do think the second book is set up to be really cool. My interest fully peaked towards the end of this book with 2 characters in particular. And probably some loose ends tied up on those characters I was talking about were mysterious, and plus the gods, the jinn and magic. So, like, I could see almost reading that book. I might wait to see what you have to say, but, like, I don't want to read that book because of this book. It's that book set up really well for magic and jinn and cool shit. But, like, this book didn't do it at all.
So we'll just have to disagree on this one, and we're going to have to come back next week, and we're going to each pick new books. We're going to go very different this time. I don't think I'm going to go with the quite dark horror again.
And I need to bring some sex back into this show. Can I say that on YouTube?
Please. I'm sure it helps the views.
Well, I need a soul cleansing after this. So I'm going to find viewers, just hang in there with me. I'll find something a bit smutty. The smut needs to come back. Still fantasy. I don't think I want fairies. I'll find something, Rob. It'll be good. I promise.
Okay.
You need smut in your life.
Sure. Let's. I think I'm actually going to pick a book that was actually recommended by one of our viewers on our Discord. And so this is another kind of blind pick. I'm just going, well, they sold it for me on Discord, and I'm going to bring it up next month.
And I love that you're doing that. So if you want us to read books that you love or you recommend, please join the Discord. We want to get conversation active there on books. A lot of book discussions. We love it, which also reminds me to thank you again for subscribing to our channel. Lots of new subscribers lately. We appreciate you all.